In this class, I want to talk about concentration. I want to give a technique of concentration. And I want to talk about what I've mentioned off and on in the other classes so far, about the importance of raising one's energy. You know, when we think about heaven, we always think of it as up there, don't we? People in every religion talk about heaven as being up above, but no telescope has ever shown angels flitting about on the clouds. Nor, even though we talk about hell as being down below, where we found devils coming up with oil gushers. We may say that gold is the source of all evil, but that would be stretching a point, I think. What we find really is that the description of heaven and hell as being above and below is really a metaphor for something that is universally true in each individual. Whenever we feel our consciousness rising, we feel good. Whenever we feel our consciousness descending, we feel pain or depressed. In fact, the very words we use are like that. I feel low, I feel in the dumps, I feel heavy, I feel down today. Or I feel up, I feel high, I feel, you know, in the Psalms it says, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. The idea of a spiritual life, a prayerful life, it's always with an upward look of the eyes, an upward soaring of the consciousness. And many saints in all spiritual traditions have described this. Saint Teresa of Avila used to say that when she entered ecstasy, it was as if the soul were being shot upward like a bullet out of a gun. And she also described the soul as being seated on the top of the head. Now in meditation, you know, it's a strange anomaly, because on the one hand we're going within, but on the other hand, going within puts us more in touch with the world without than if we go without. Now, how do we figure that? You see, we are surrounded by veils, veils of delusion, veils of mental darkness. What meditation does is clarify the mind, and in the process remove those veils, so that finally there isn't any veil between you, your inner reality, you might call it your subjective reality, and the outer reality. And the same thing is true, that as you raise your consciousness, you find yourself getting into greater and greater clarity, to the point where you find yourself in touch with an infinite reality. And if, on the other hand, you try to embrace that infinite reality by going out through the senses, you're locked in this body. To meditate deeply, you've got to go upward and outward into the infinite. You can't go outward like this with your two fists holding on to everything. Heaven comes the more we feel ourselves united within. Now we have come, in evolution even, it's stated that we've come from lower forms of life. We've come from relative unconsciousness. There isn't any absolute unconsciousness, because all is consciousness. All is a dream in the mind of God. But the rocks, it's harder to prove that the rocks have any level of consciousness, and certainly whatever level they have is far below what we have. You come up into the plants, they have perhaps a little bit more. Even rocks respond to stimuli in ways that most people don't know, but experiments have done to show that they do. Plants, it's much better known that they respond to beautiful music, loving thoughts, or on the other hand, that they wilt before unloving thoughts and so on. Even so, most people might find it a little hard to relate to the thought that plants have any kind of consciousness. Animals do, but it's of a lower kind of consciousness still. And when you reach the human level, there's greater awareness, but we've come from relative unawareness to the human level. Now that unawareness is represented in the human body by the part that's below. The spine develops in the vertebrates, the energy begins to come up the spine. If we were to try to unite ourselves by going downward, we wouldn't find that unity. This is the mistake that many psychologists made more in the past than now, but thinking that if we express our lower nature wholeheartedly, we'll become integrated and whole human beings. Well, it's never happened, and the reason it never has happened is that it can't happen. It goes against our nature. We aren't that lower nature. We think that because of what we've studied with evolution and so on, we sort of think of ourselves as glorified monkeys. But in fact, what we are is unawakened saints. The monkey is simply at a level that hasn't yet reached the human level. The human is just at that level that hasn't yet reached up into its own complete potential. And the only way that we'll ever find that integration that we want is to raise our consciousness, bring it up into the head, bring it into the spiritual eye that I described, bring that unity upward so that our lower impulses, for example, lust becomes love, hatred becomes love, sorrow becomes happiness, becomes joy, becomes bliss. All lower qualities become transmuted and find their perfection, their fulfillment in these soul qualities, and finally in the vision of the infinite, that omnipresence, which is our true home. And so, what we need to do in meditation too is try consciously to raise our energy as well as our consciousness from the body through the spine up to the spiritual eye. In the process of raising our consciousness, we find the energy withdrawing from the senses, and we become conscious on another level, not just the physical level, or indeed not at all the physical level to begin with. Only in the higher stages are we able then to bring that consciousness down and live through the senses, live in the body, but always from a divine state of awareness. Now then, an example of this would be love. We want to develop devotion. We need to have devotion, we need to have love to reach God. God is love. How can you find Him without love? He will fill your heart with love, but you've got to make the first strivings to open that heart. And as it happens often to people, whether in chanting God's name or in viewing some beautiful thing or feeling some beautiful sentiment or feeling in fact devotion to God, what often happens is that because we're used, when we feel love in the heart, for it to go outward, that devotion spills itself outward in tears, in emotion, in excitement, in a certain amount of tension. What we need to do in this, as in all other things, is to channel that heart's energy up to the point between the eyebrows so that it doesn't go into emotion, which it's almost forced to do in the beginning when it's very strong. But if you can control it and direct it upward in meditation, then you'll find that that love, when it goes toward tears, then there's exhaustion afterwards. But when it goes toward that divine love in superconsciousness, there's nothing but elation. Now that's one example. But on all levels, what we need to do is, in meditation, try consciously to raise our energy toward the point between the eyebrows. That's why we hold our bodies completely still. When Patanjali talked about the different stages on the path to enlightenment, he described, after sitting still, asana, then he described pranayama, and many books on the subject say that that means just breathing exercises, because prana means breathing, the breath. But it means the breath because the breath is a reflection of the energy. And what he's referring to and what it really means is energy. Yama means control, control over the energy so that you can learn to raise it upward. We've heard many times, because nowadays people are all somewhat familiar with these terms. You've heard of the chakras, the centers in the spine. These are knots of energy that need to be sort of awakened, which is to say that we need to learn how to bring that energy upward through these doors, as you might call them, psychic doors, and direct it all upward toward the brain. Now, everything that you do in meditation should have this as a part of the movement, so that you don't just sit there and let your feelings and energy roam around in a vague way. Try really to discipline your mind. This is why some of the yoga postures are so good too, because they stretch the spine, they make the extremities of the body relax, they bring the energy into the spine and help you to direct that energy in a relaxed way upward toward the brain. Now, in meditation, first of all, as I said, you've got to keep the body absolutely still. But then you want to try consciously to live in the spine. It would even help you to try breathing in the spine. Just take with me right now. Sit upright and inhale through the nose and feel that you're breathing from the base of your spine all the way up, bending here at the medulla oblongata, going through the brain, up to the point between the eyebrows. Exhale. Again. Exhale. And so on. I'm not going to do that at length right now. What I want to do is talk about something that will help you to bring all that energy and consciousness together, and that is concentration. And in fact, by concentration, you will develop the power to be able to go into these higher states, because as long as the mind is wandering, there's no hope. It's sort of like a lake. If there are ripples on the lake and the moon is shining, you don't see the moon clearly reflected. You see little bits of light here and there, little flickerings, glimmerings, but you don't see the moon. And so likewise with the mind, when the mind is restless, when the feelings are agitated, then you will find that the realities that you're trying to penetrate to are just little flickerings. You feel a little bit happy, you maybe get a little glimpse of light, you hear a little bit of the sound of the universe, you feel joy or love, but it's always just little flickerings. And when you can learn to concentrate your mind, it's like making that lake still. Your mind becomes like a flawless mirror, and in that mirror you can behold whatever realities there are. So to go beyond your own mental concepts of God, your own creation of God, you might say, into the perception of whatever really is up there, the first thing you've got to do is make that mind still. It's like a lens on a camera. If the lens is dirty, you can't bring it to a proper focus. If the lens isn't adjusted, you can't bring it to a proper focus. You have to clean the lens. So you have to clean the mind of restless thoughts. You've got to adjust the mind so that it's focused in one direction, and then you'll be able to reach that level of concentration where even prayer becomes effective. You know, people often think, well, I just want to pray, but supposing somebody were to come to you and well, let's say it's a child of yours who says that, would you give me $1? Now there might be a good reason for giving him $1. It might be a bad reason, and you would like to perhaps think about it before you give it to him, or you want to feel if he really wants it, or is he just idle in his questions. So suppose he comes to you now and says, I want $1. Dad, Mom, I want $1, and listen, you know, well, as a matter of fact, look at that ant over there. Look at it, it's climbing up. You would like to give me $1? You know, yesterday I went and I did so and so, and his mind is wandering here and there, and every now and then he touches base and mentions the $1 again, then he's off wandering on something else. Well, you'll naturally feel, well, I guess it's really not that important. Let's talk about supper. So, anytime you want something and your mind wanders all over the place, you're not going to get it with nearly the same likelihood, certainty, as if you really want it. Your whole mind is going in that direction. Concentration is the key to success. Nobody can succeed at anything if his mind isn't under his own control. To develop the power of concentration, Danny asked me that question at the very beginning of this course. How practical is meditation? Or can you combine meditation with practical living? And the answer to that is right here. One answer, that when you can develop the power to concentrate, then you can succeed at anything. But you've got to learn to really be able to focus your heart's energy, your mind's energy, your willpower, everything, and then anything you want to achieve is really quite easy. You will notice that there is one thing that divides successful people from unsuccessful people. Almost always, successful people have the power to concentrate. Unsuccessful people would like to do it, but they're always dreaming about other things and they don't put real will into it. So how do we concentrate? We've talked of the importance of techniques. Here's a technique I want to teach you. I'd like to begin by saying that in the body, and I've mentioned this also earlier, in the body there is a seat of concentration. It's here at the point between the eyebrows. You can tell, as I told you earlier, when you concentrate deeply on anything, you tend to sort of frown, don't you? Because your energy goes here automatically. It's also the seat of ecstasy, and when you feel inspired by something, you say, "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" instead of, "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" Isn't that so? It's just natural for you to do it, because the upliftment of the mind takes the mind and the eyes upward. Concentration brings your mind concentrated to the point between the eyebrows. In fact, you know, anatomically, the frontal lobe of the brain is the most highly developed. It's the most recent acquisition, you might say. In our evolution, the lower animals have foreheads that go right back like this. And even when they describe the primitive men, they show them with foreheads going back. Man, Homo sapiens, has this kind of forehead. And when they've performed prefrontal lobotomy and cut off that frontal lobe of the brain to reduce extreme depression and so on, I don't believe it's legal anymore to do it. What they found was that it took away what some doctors described as soul qualities. The patient lost his sense of idealism, his sense of purpose in life, his higher vision of things. He became more or less like a human animal. This is the focal point for this frontal lobe. And by concentrating in that frontal lobe, you develop your higher nature. One thing that can help you to concentrate here is the direction of your eyes. It's very good to look upward. I've talked about the body as being like a bow, with the body, the front of the body like the arc of the bow, and the spine being like the string. Here's another bow, the eyebrows, and the arrow of your concentration being shot through the spiritual eye at this point. When you concentrate, then try to send all that energy upward by also raising your eyes. You know, you can actually, and it's a good exercise, here's just another technique I'll teach you on the way, you might say, a means of helping to control your different states of consciousness. Direct your eyes, and with the eyes, direct your energy and consciousness. Look down. Now do it with me. Just look down and close your eyes. And you can even affirm mentally, through slowly drifting waters, I sink into subconsciousness. Through slowly drifting waters, I sink into subconsciousness. Then raise your vision, look straight ahead, open your eyes wide, and be completely on a conscious level. Come out of the subconscious the way you would in sleep, and affirm with me, with a burst of energy, I rise to greet the world. With a burst of energy, I rise to greet the world. With a burst of energy, I rise to greet the world. And then raise your eyes up to the spiritual eye, looking upward, affirm, I awake in thy light. I awake in thy light. I am joyful, I am free. I awake in thy light. You can even sing it. I awake in thy light, I awake in thy light. I am joyful, I am free. I awake in thy light. I awake in thy light. I awake in thy light. I am joyful, I am free. I awake in thy light. And then close the eyes and look down again, so you have complete control over these different states. Sink quickly into the subconscious. Through slowly drifting waters, I sink into subconsciousness. Through slowly drifting waters, I sink into subconsciousness. With a burst of energy, I rise to greet the world. With a burst of energy I rise to greet the world. I awake in thy light. I awake in thy light. I am joyful, I am free. I awake in thy light. Now when you meditate, look upward. Look up as if you were holding your thumb out here and concentrating on the thumb, so your eyes don't go like that, but crossed slightly so that you have this feeling of being focused on the middle distance, which is where you'll actually see the light when you are calm enough and interiorized enough. And then a good thing to do is to have the eyes half open and half closed. You see, the superconscious is, you might say, halfway between sleeping and wakefulness, subconsciousness and consciousness. It's a directional thing so that it's up where consciousness is here, subconsciousness is here, but it's also just between the two in this calmness of it. So that if when you go to sleep, for example, just as you're about to go to sleep, try to hold that state, you'll go into at least a state of semi-superconsciousness. When you wake up in the morning, instead of quickly jumping out of bed, inhale. Yogananda used to say, give your whole body a breakfast of energy. Tense the body, throw the breath out and relax. And then try to feel that semi-state again. You know, it's an interesting point too. Many yogis in India have said, concentrate on the horizon line, like of an ocean, where you see just a straight line, and try to penetrate that line. Here you're trying to penetrate the line of the eyebrows. The dark above and the light below you could speak of as consciousness and subconsciousness. In this case, you'd talk of the subconsciousness here, but that's just a figure of speech. The idea is catching between the two. You see, we live in a three-dimensional world. And what we want to do is go into the fourth dimension. How do we do it? By reducing those three dimensions into one dimension, a single line, and then trying to penetrate that line, go beyond that one dimension, and suddenly we're in a fourth dimension or a dimensionless state, which is superconsciousness. So when you meditate, you could look up at that line, or you could lower your eyes part way. They'll flicker in the beginning, then when your mind gets concentrated, they'll stop flickering. And this is really the best position for the eyes for meditation. Half open, half closed. Open eyes represent consciousness. Closed eyes represent subconsciousness. Half open and half closed represent superconsciousness. Practice that a little bit. You'll find that the tendency for the eyelids to flicker will pass away as soon as your mind becomes still. Now then, when you concentrate at the point between the eyebrows, this is already a very important practice on the path toward concentration. I would like to actually continue with a technique in the next class so we can take a little bit longer and we can keep the length of these classes a little bit more equal. So let's begin with what I've said and go more deeply into it. I'd like to start by singing a chant, and then let's chant first. I awake in thy light, I awake in thy light, I am joyful, I am free, I awake in thy light, I awake in thy light, I awake in thy light, I am joyful, I am free, I awake in thy light, I awake in thy love, I awake in thy love, I am joyful, I am free, I awake in thy love, I awake in thy love, I awake in thy love, I am joyful, I am free, I awake in thy love, I awake in thy joy, I awake in thy joy, I am joyful, I am free, I awake in thy joy. Meditate now and practice what I've said. Inhaling deeply, 12 times counting, inhaling, holding, exhaling. Feel space in the body. Inhale, tense the body. Exhale, relax. Feel space surrounding the body. Concentrate at the point between the eyebrows. Raise your eyes to that point and develop that feeling of the energy rising and flowing out through the spiritual eye into infinity.